Okay, let's kick off. As the final people take their seats, can I welcome you, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 2011 Graeme Clark Oration Dinner. If you didn't see me before, my name is Natasha Mitchell. I'm from the ABC, from Radio National, where I'm a science broadcaster and presenter, and I'm delighted to be your MC this evening. And let's extend a special welcome to our orator this year, Professor Terry Sanofsky, and his wife, Dr. Beatrice Golem, for joining us from San Diego tonight. Let's give them a round of applause. And thanks for joining us. And thank you too to the Amati Quartet for ushering us in this evening with their beautiful tones. They're going to play for us right throughout the night. Let's give them a round of applause too. Thank you. We have a room full of Australian luminaries tonight in science, in medicine, in business, education, even diplomacy. When I read your names, I thought, let's measure their collective IQ, turn it into an energy source, and that'll give our politicians something to think about, won't it? So thank you for being here tonight. We're looking forward to hearing presentations from some of you throughout the evening in between what we're really here to do, and that is eat and drink and talk. All of you are people who know better than most that innovation is a real team effort. It's a meeting of minds. It's a convergence of skills and disciplines, and that's really what the oration is about. It's what tonight's gathering is very much about, the convergence of great minds, of great fields of endeavour, and the celebration of a great scientist, Professor Graeme Clark, who understood really from the outset the great importance about building partnerships, particularly between engineering, which is my original background before I became a broadcaster, engineering, biology, and the computer sciences and IT, critical fields. And I must say I've been interested in recent years to reflect on what people call the nano-bio-info-cogno, or NBIC if we need another acronym in our lives. That convergence between nano, bio, info, cogno is relevant here tonight too, I think. Why are these fields, and why particularly partnerships between those fields, why are they so utterly important to our future, to our health and well-being, to our economy, to so much about life as we know it? How do we break down the silos that traditionally have existed between disciplines, particularly in our academies? And that is tonight's dinner. That's what it's about. Tonight's dinner is a good start for breaking down some of those silos and building partnerships between those key fields. Enjoy the speakers throughout the evening, enjoy each other's company. To kick off, enjoy your entree and the Amati Quartet. Thank you. Mine is pouring fast and free. Before I welcome our first speaker this evening, let me thank some of the sponsors supporting the 2011 Oration and this dinner. We are guests of the sponsors tonight and of this terrific venue too, which has been shared with us at no cost, so thank you. A thank you to Mr Neville Stevens, the chairman of NICTA. NICTA is Australia's ICT Research Centre for Excellence, to Mr Matt Carrick of the Department of Business and Innovation, representing the Victorian Minister of Technology, Mr Gordon Rich Phillips, to Mr Lee Harry, Chief Executive of our fabulous new Melbourne Convention and Exhibition Centre. I love doing events here. It's so clean and wonderful and sparkly. I love it. He's also here representing the Club Melbourne Ambassadors Program. To Professor Evan Mariels, Dean of the Melbourne School of Engineering at the University of Melbourne. And of course, we should put our hands together because the University of Melbourne celebrates its 150th anniversary this year. Hurrah! Happy birthday. And to Professor James Angus, Dean of the Faculty of Medicine, Dentistry and Health Sciences at the University, a big thank you too for your generous support of tonight's event. Let me introduce our first celebrity and scientist for the evening, Professor Warwick Anderson. Warwick started life in country New South Wales. This will become relevant later on in the evening, why I'm telling you this. And he went to a primary school, I found out, on the edge of the Clarence River. Hold that thought. Now he spends his life in the corridors of Canberra as CEO of the National Health and Medical Research Council, Australia's major governmental funding body for health and medical research, of course. Warwick was head of the School of Biomedical Sciences at Monash University, my old institution, and Deputy Director of the Baker Medical Research Institute. And before that, he held research fellowships at the University of Sydney and Harvard Medical School. For his contributions to medical research, he was made a member of the Order of Australia in 2005. Let's give him a hearty welcome.
Well, thank you, Natasha, and I'll never forgive you for calling me a celebrity, so just hold that thought. First of all, let me acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting tonight and their elders, past and present. And there are many, many distinguished guests. Professor Serotonin, our Nobel Prize winner, Peter Doherty, many distinguished and honoured guests. And it's just a personal delight for me to say a couple of words about Graeme Clark and his achievements. I first met Graeme about 25 years ago when the phone rang one day and he asked me, well, you're a physiologist, you should be able to help me with this sort of approach. And it was the beginning of a long interaction, toing and froing over many years. And I'm sorry he can't be with us tonight because, as I've said on previous occasions, he's one of the great Australians that we have amongst us. As you all know, it's about 30 years since the first successful implant, so Graeme's journey started long before that, and I'm told now there's over 125,000 men, women and children around the world who had benefited from that original vision. And it's great that our country has recognised that. He's a companion of the Order of Australia. He's won the Australian Entrepreneur of the Year Award and the Victoria Prize. I think I speak for Margaret Shield from the ARC as well, that the NHMRC and the ARC are very pleased and privileged to have supported his vision along the way. Our records show, and no, I didn't get this out of RGMS. Sorry, that's an in-joke for the scientists in the room. I think we awarded 17 grants to him and his team over the year, including Rob, and on those he was first named Chief Investigator on 7, and 2 for program grants during the 1980s. For studies that were developing the sensory prostheses. And Graeme is a great example of what the then Minister for Health urged the National Health and Medical Research Council to do at the first meeting of the Council 75 years ago. Now, I'm not going to say whether we're older or younger than Graeme. I think those who know him can make that conclusion yourself. But 75 years ago, the then Health Minister said of the NHMRC at its first meeting that the Council must actively pursue research and develop it, and as soon as new knowledge is acquired, it must be applied. And so they have remained the two arms of the NHMRC, research creating knowledge and research what we now call translation. And again, I think that you will all know that Graeme did that. He pursued research of a very high quality and as Minister Hughes said then, as fast as new knowledge is acquired, it must be applied. Well, Graeme did it very fast, and a lot of people have benefited. At the NHMRC, I guess we think of 3 ways in which the country benefits from the taxpayers' investment in health and medical research. A virtuous cycle, a concept originally developed by Peter Wills, but perhaps can be expanded. So if the public and private companies and benefactors do invest in health and medical research, the country gains benefits in 3 main ways. First of all, patients benefit. If we can develop new technology, new devices, new drugs, new treatments, new procedures, then patients benefit. And the healthcare system itself can benefit. It might be less costly, but it's certainly more cost effective if it's based on evidence from research. The second area, of course, is also the commercial development that we see with the bionic ear. And from those discoveries, the great Australian company Cochlear has developed. Of course, science is not enough for a successful company. You need an entrepreneur and capital and so on. But being built on great research is a great start. And I'm told that if you put together the financial benefits to Australia from Cochlear and CSL, another company based on research, firmly on research, if you put together their benefits to Australia each year in employment, shareholder dividend and tax, it would pay for all the research from the NHMRC for a number of years. Now, the third benefit from health and medical research, which perhaps we don't think about so much, is in prevention. Everybody believes prevention's the right way to go, of course, but often it's not based on evidence. If it was, we wouldn't have the obesity epidemic that we currently do. Everybody thinks they know what to do about prevention of obesity, but it ain't working, and what we really need is much more hard, scientific, clear-headed research on what actually works in terms of public policy in obesity. And if you watch NHMRC's tracker, you'll see some announcements about that, we hope, in the next 6 months or so. So let me just return to the issue of the multidisciplinary nature of research in the 21st century. I mean, Graeme was a pioneer in this area. He didn't restrict his research to audiology. He added in whatever expertise and disciplines that were needed. Just to name a few, physiology, of course, number one, but also electrochemistry, physics, surgery, speech science, audiology, many, many more, IT. And I think before his time, but certainly what we now see in most successful research projects here and around the world. And it's interesting to think about how rapidly the physical sciences are coming to biology in recent years. If we were here 10 or 20 years ago, most of the cutting edge of the research would be chemistry based. The molecular biology revolution was very strongly based on chemistry. But now, and I think Natasha mentioned them, bionics, bioinformatics, informatics generally, nanotechnology, computational biology generally, and watch this space for the NHMRC on that too, systems biology and so on. Natasha, I think you called it NBIC, which is a 4-letter word, and of course a number of people have pointed out that RGMS is a 4-letter word as well. So the convergence of fields, the coming together and then exploding out is certainly what health and medical research is in the 21st century, and it's a challenge to peer review and to funding bodies like us and no doubt our sister organisations around the world. And as Graeme had so firmly in mind, what's the point of all this? The point is accessible, effective, personalised and affordable health care. So our biggest grant that the NHMRC has given in recent years is a grant to the Institute of Molecular Bioscience at the University of Queensland as part of our membership of the International Cancer Genome Consortium. There's 24 countries, their funding bodies, joining together in common protocols to elucidate the genomics of the 50 most common cancer types around the world. And in Australia, University of Queensland with the Garvan and the Peter Mac here are working on pancreatic cancer and ovarian cancer. The grant's $25 million, bigger than the average project grant, it's true. And what's it mostly being spent on? Well, it's being spent on informatics, of course sequencing as well, but informatics. And I think it's a very strong sign of the time. Now, next week, and no doubt you all know this, it's Brain Awareness Week, and it's obvious to everybody in this room, of course, that anything to do with the work of Graeme, it might be the ear that was fixed, but it's the brain that does the hearing. And I'm very pleased to say that the NHMRC has a very strong portfolio of grants in the neuroscience, currently 778 grants on all the neurosciences, including 119 in the area of dementia, which seems to be a great deal of interest in Canberra in dementia, and I couldn't possibly I'm not going to make an editorial comment on that. So thanks for the invitation to talk to you tonight. I wish Graeme was here so I could personally thank him again for his fantastic contributions to humankind, and I'm sure we all wish him well. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Warwick Anderson. Would you like me to make an editorial comment about the interest in dementia in Canberra? I can if you like. Thank you for your presentation. As many of you will know from the Oration, Graeme would have loved to have been here. He wouldn't have missed it for quids. It is the event in his name, but he's got whooping cough. And so it's in our interest that he's not here. So we wish him a speedy recovery. Whooping cough is a horrible thing, and another example of why vaccinations are important, hey? He'd like to extend his thanks to you for being here. He's sorry he can't be with us, but we're videoing tonight for him. This past year has been a huge one for Graeme. I think every year of his life has been huge, but this one has been a year of celebration. In September, he celebrated his 75th birthday. In October, he was, of course, awarded the Lister Prize, the Lister Medal, the highest award in surgery in the UK, making him only the third Australian recipient of the award after Sir Howard Florey and Sir Peter Morris. So wonderful that he was recognised. And there you go, surgery. People wouldn't have necessarily made that connection who associate him with the bionic ear, but of course that was so fundamental to the success of that innovation. The ICT for Life Sciences Forum, who are hosting this event, and a number of other sponsors, put on a grand birthday bash for Graeme. Some of you were no doubt there, and we're bringing you some highlights tonight on video.
Graeme, at 75, you're just a spring chicken. But what a life of achievement you have to look back on and also to look forward to. The cochlear implant is still getting better, and moreover, we're now using it as a model for this great adventure of the bionic eye. Wouldn't it be wonderful if that one came off?
You know that we all regard you as a great hero of Australian biomedical research. We all talk about applying the results of our studies to human benefit and for commercial application, and you and Cochlear actually did it, and did it to great human benefit.
First of all, can I congratulate you on your 75th birthday, and also congratulate you on being selected to receive the Lister Medal. The work you've done for cochlear implants is very well worthy of this award. People's lives have been transformed, 200,000 of them, with millions and millions to come. This is because of your vision, drive, intelligence, initiative. It is a truly fantastic achievement, in biblical terms, to make the deaf to hear.
As has been said already, Graeme is a very humble person, and his whole life has been to use his talents for others. Integrity has been really important to him. On occasions when I've needed to make decisions and gone to him for advice, it has always been do the right thing by other people.
He would go above and beyond anything I could possibly have needed to know for Year 12 biology, given his knowledge on the subject. He would just happen to have the most recent Year 12 biology textbook on his shelf and would pull it out and animatedly describe to me the workings of the cell.
The first thing to say is that yes, we were experimented on. However, we didn't suffer, and in fact it was a rather novel experience. I think I was about 4 years of age, and I remember having electrodes connected to all my fingers. And I was pleased to learn at the age of 4 that those electrodes converted electrical impulses representing speech into a combination of place-coding vibrations. It was the tickle talker, rather different from Tickle Me Elmo.
The focus tonight is, of course, Graeme, on your achievements of the multi-channel cochlear implant, but I wanted to share an anecdote that is about one of the other, perhaps lesser known or recognised achievements, and that being establishing audiology training in Australia. I think you might have done that out of self-preservation, having thought that the cochlear implant's going to work so well. Gosh, we're going to need somebody to do all the donkey work, so let's make audiology.
The thing that Graeme really brought together back in those days was a terrific team of multidisciplinary people looking at different dimensions of things that might be important when it came to how cochlear implant might work. And if you look at the photographs that are taken back then, the 1975 photograph, what you see is the students. What you don't see is the whole network of people that Graeme had got together to get the students actually allocated into otolaryngology. And so I think, Graeme, that was an extraordinary thing that you did, to have the vision that you needed all these different disciplines, and then to go and take people's students from them, basically, to come and work in otolaryngology.
There's an old English proverb that states, "Great oaks from little acorns grow." Professor Clark, the legacy from that seed well planted by you really several decades ago now, represented by several 100,000 people around the world who've been provided the gift of hearing from a cochlear implant, is truly a remarkable oak tree now. A wonderful legacy you created. And this oak tree continues to grow. There'd be perhaps 30,000 people around the world who will receive a cochlear implant this year.
I found a short citation from Professor Emeritus Sir Macfarlane Burnett that is a little gem. I have been very impressed by the emergence of the bionic ear as a practical proposition, but even more by the promise for the future that it seems to embody. It makes use of the arrangement in the cochlea for pitch recognition to bring electronic technology into direct functional relationship with the nervous system and the human consciousness. Maybe that unique relationship has no other parallel in the nervous system, and that thus the direct link between electronics and physiology will find no other application to medicine. Nevertheless, I feel it may represent a new benchmark in the understanding of neural and mental function in terms of their physical components. Perhaps the work will not reach such a climax for centuries, but whatever may eventuate, special credit will be made to Professor Clark and his colleagues for their pioneering and successful work. The University salutes you, Graeme, for a remarkable, as they say, mother sings, child hears. Thank you and happy birthday.
Of all the industrial research and development grants that came across my table, and there were so many, they were all fascinating, they were all very, very important. But the outstanding one was unquestionably the bionic ear. From the time I met Graeme and his team and learnt about it, it enriched my life, quite frankly, broadened all of my horizons, and of course it went on, as we hoped it would, to enrich the lives of so many people all around this world.
But the extraordinary achievement of Graeme Clark and his team, and the extraordinary speed with which they succeeded in getting international recognition, is exceptional. His work is one of the great intellectual achievements of our time, a major contribution to the relief of disability. He showed vision, courage, inspiration, nobility of spirit, humanitarianism, and he transformed everything that he touched. And he was greatly blessed, of course, to have the wonderful support of Margaret with him.
People have said the bionic ear is a miracle and an answer to their prayers. Miracles, by definition, are wonderful, life-changing, and beyond our control. And many things beyond our control had to happen before ever we were on the scene. The invention of the silicon chip, Graeme's father's deafness, the establishment of the chair of otolaryngology through the Honourable Peter Howson in 1970, and the timing of the chair when Graeme was only just qualified with a PhD to be even able to apply. He saw the chair as providing the only way for him to combine clinical work with research to reach his dream. I also think back to the 70s and what we were reading then. I remember once when I suggested Graeme read a book I was reading, he said, "Is it about miracles? I'm only reading books about miracles now."
He is truly a remarkable man who has accomplished so much in his life. His determination in finding a solution to help those with hearing loss and his modesty once he achieved that goal are wonderful characteristics. I personally think of him every day for giving me this life-changing opportunity.
Professor Graeme Clark, who are you? Hi. Thank you for everything you have given me and to all the deaf people in the world. I just can't tell you how much you have given to me, and how privileged I am and how lucky I am to receive this precious gift of the cochlear implant.
Hi, I'm Shan, and I was the first bilingually deaf child to have the implant in 1990 when I was 2.5 years old, and I received my second implant when I was 19 in 2006. I wouldn't be standing here talking to you if it was not for Professor Graeme Clark and his invention of the bionic ear. He gave me the gift of hearing and the potential to reach for the stars. I will be forever grateful for the opportunities that my gift of hearing has given me. You are an inspiration to us all, Professor Graeme Clark. Happy birthday, you're my hero.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Beautiful. And he's got the world's best smile, doesn't he, as well, that grin. It was interesting, 2 weeks ago, I had the opportunity to visit the world's only deaf university in Washington called Gallaudet University. It caters exclusively for the deaf community and others, but it's an extraordinary institution. And as I sat down to do an interview with the provost, we discussed the fact that he, in his, I think, 50s now, had decided to have a cochlear implant installed. Big decision for an adult. And it was very interesting to talk about it in that context of an institution that has been so acclaimed in the deaf community around the world for driving the education and leadership of the deaf community. So wonderful. Warwick Anderson spoke about the virtuous cycle. I think that's a lovely expression. And Peter Doherty, our very own Nobel laureate, in his testimony to Graeme, acknowledged that Graeme, I guess, is one fantastic example of how the virtuous cycle can work. So he was one of those who has been so successful in translating fundamental science into actual outcomes for people's lives in a very powerful way, an historic way. And it's my delight to invite our next speaker to the stage. Professor Peter Doherty started out as a vet. I think you're the first vet to win a Nobel Prize, in fact, aren't you, Peter? He did his doctoral studies at the University of Edinburgh and went on to share the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1996 with his Swiss colleague for their discovery of how the immune system recognises virus-infected cells. He was Australian of the Year in 1997. Occasionally we get it right, don't we? And we acknowledge our scientists, not just our footballers. And Peter's since been commuting between St Jude's Children's Research Hospital in Memphis and the Department of Microbiology here and Immunology here at the University of Melbourne. He's one of our great science communicators in the public arena too, which I think is a real skill, a real talent and a delight for me as someone working in radio, with books like A Light History of Hot Air and The Beginner's Guide to Winning the Nobel Prize, just in case you're interested. Take notes. Please give Peter Doherty a warm welcome.
Well, thank you. The real celebrity, Peter Doherty, is actually a drug-addicted Irish rock star. And he wrote a book which outsold any book I've ever written by about 20 times. And so did Mick Gatto's book, actually. It's a bit hard to think what to say about Graeme Clark. I mean, everything has been said and said eloquently and over again. And of course, he's a wonderful guy, a great humanitarian. His achievement was enormous. I'm also conscious of the fact that I've only got 5 minutes and I stand between you and dinner, but so I won't go on too long. I'm sorry to hear he has whooping cough. Now, there's something I know something about. We haven't really discussed whooping cough. I'm an immunologist. I work with that other great complex system, the immune system. And though I did start out actually in neuropathology, but Graeme Clark, whooping cough. As we get older, of course, our immune systems fail. Everything fails as we get older, and we get whooping cough from our grandkids, not the ones that we saw on the program. They look too old, or maybe his great-grandkids. And there's a problem with whooping cough. I mean, the vaccine that we have now is not as good a vaccine as the vaccine we used to have. The vaccine we used to have was a lot dirtier. It gave you fever, it gave you a sore arm, but it actually gave you a much better immune response. And the new one's all been cleaned up, but it's not quite as good a vaccine as it was, as my friend Ian Gust, who knows about these things, was telling me. He's an infectious disease guy. Also, there's this, the society has changed, and now, of course, many people don't accept that it's necessary to vaccinate children against all these childhood diseases, and so there's more infection around, and we do get deaths from whooping cough, and we've had some in Australia and we've had some in California recently. So I'm sorry that Graham's got whooping cough, but I'm sure he's well on the way to recovery and he's getting excellent medical attention. So Graeme Clark, I mean, what is there left to say about him? Well, basically, he's a medical doctor, a surgeon, and he's done that thing which is so difficult. I always admire my colleagues who are both physicians and scientists. Being a vet is great in a medical institution. Nobody ever asks for your clinical advice. In fact, I'm actually a professor of paediatrics in the University of Tennessee Medical School, where I had an appointment at St Jude Children's Research Hospital. It's an honorary appointment. They pay me nothing, and they told me if I ever appeared on the wards with a stethoscope, you know, all these jokes about little kids and puppy dogs being much the same, I would be shot. And I've taken that very seriously. So Graeme he was a physician. I mean, he's an otorhinolaryngologist, and to me, those guys are both physicians and surgeons. And I think the thing about surgeons is that they do things. And if they do things, they've got to go on with it. I mean, they can't be philosophical. Once you've cut and the blood is flowing, you've got to complete it. So I think he bought that character of the surgeon, the man who sees a problem and sets out to solve a problem to what he did. And as we've heard, he took a PhD early on. Now, we see more scientific surgeons now than we used to. In my field, there always were scientific surgeons as long as I can remember because of transplantation, people like Peter Morris and Roy Kahn and so forth. But there weren't that many scientific surgeons. There were people like Judith Volkmann, the angiogenesis factor guy, and unfortunately died recently, who was also a great scientist. But Graeme had this early training in science, and when he got this chair in otorhinolaryngology, otology or whatever it is, he brought together a team of people, of engineers and people with skills that he didn't have, but he knew he needed to have if he was to go ahead and do what he was aiming to do. And that is much more a paradigm now than it was then, that you bring people together of different disciplines, you build teams, and you stand behind that team. You don't claim all the credit, but you make sure it works, and you push ahead. So he's kind of ahead of his time. And what did he achieve? Well, he achieved, as Terry was telling me, the first real bionic application to the sensory system. And we've had all these bionic or prosthetic type applications. Many of us have had artificial hips for years, or knees, and so forth. But this is the first application which actually goes to the sensory system, not just a mechanical application. And as we heard also earlier, that type of application now with modern electronics, modern computing and so forth is being extended to all sorts of situations. And that, I think, is one of the areas where we're going to see tremendous advance over the years. There's a lot of talk, of course, about stem cell technology and how we'll solve various neurological problems with stem cells. That is a very tough road. It's a very tough road for very many reasons, including not being able to control the differentiation completely. But the idea of combining the mechanical, the electronic, and the biological, I think, is one that's going to see a lot more application as time goes by. So Graeme Clark stands as the man who really started this off. He is a hero, he's a great humanitarian, he's a great Australian, and I think it's tremendous to be asked to speak at this lecture that's in his honour and this lecture series that's in his honour. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. Perfect combination of themes. Thank you in honouring Graeme Clark. And just continuing this theme of all great scientists starting somewhere on the banks of the Clarence River, in Warwick's case, in Peter Doherty's case, I gather your childhood was started on the outskirts of Brisbane and you commuted to high school on a steam train. And I gather also that even though he was a natural at physics and chemistry, your real natural inclination was for history and literature. So there you go, the makings of another great polymath. And on that theme, to celebrate the making of the next generation of great Australian scientists, scientists like Peter Doherty, like Graeme Clark, like Warwick Anderson, all of who we've heard from tonight, can I get the students and teachers at tables 17, 24 and 33 to please stand up? Where are you? If you could stand up. Ladies and gentlemen, these... They didn't know that I was going to do this to them, but I am going to do this to you. These are a group of Victoria's brightest secondary school students and outstanding science teachers. They're with us this evening as special guests. We're really grateful to have you here. Our student guests, and yes, I'm going to name you, are Timothy Harkin from St Kevin's College, Ella Duvet from Fintona Girls' School, Dimity Hannay from Fintona Girls' School, Amelia Barrow from Kilvington Girls' Grammar, also from Kilvington, Lorena Hem, and Sher Chen from Kilvington as well. Give them an applause. And with them are outstanding science teachers. They've been nominated by their peers as such. They are Anne-Marie Williams from Methodist Ladies College and Josie Crisera from Aiken College. And joining them also are fabulous science teachers and leaders, Adam Bilsma from St Kevin's College, Krista Ackerman-Edwards from Fintona Girls' School and Matthew Brinson from Kilvington Girls' Grammar. Let's give them a big applause. Congratulations, keep it up. And before we break for our main course, your host would like me to thank some more generous sponsors. Mr Lee Clifford, the chairman of Qantas Airways, Mr Wilson De Silva, editor of Cosmos magazine, Linda Sorrell, Chief Executive of Melbourne Health, Julia Swanson of the Melbourne Convention and Visitors Bureau, Professor Peter Collo of RMIT University, Professor Michael Gilding of Swinburne University, and also Professor Peter Taylor of the Victorian Life Sciences Computation Initiative. It takes a lot of people to put this sort of event on. Thank you for your generous sponsorship and support. On with your conversations and your dinner. I hope you've been enjoying your meal. Dessert is to come. And I also want to acknowledge the Amati String Quartet. They've packed up their strings, but they gave us a lovely show tonight. So thank you to them. Thank you. Now, much to my delight as someone who broadcasts a lot on the brain and mind, and never the twain shall meet, or perhaps they have, or I was interested in David's reflections on dualism at the end of the presentation tonight. Excellent way to wrap, I thought. Melbourne has become a major hub for neuroscience research in the Southern Hemisphere, and that's right on my doorstep, so I'm thrilled. The next speaker I have for you is a Melbourne-based researcher. He also happens to be one of the world's great epilepsy researchers, Professor Sam Berkovic. Clinical neurologist and researcher, so there you go, that kind of combination playing out again in an individual's career. Sam Berkovic is Laureate Professor in the Department of Medicine at the University of Melbourne and Director of the Epilepsy Research Centre at Austin Health. His group, with molecular genetics collaborators in Adelaide and Germany, discovered the first gene associated with epilepsy in 1995. And his group has gone on to discover a whole host of other genes because, of course, something like epilepsy is a complex disorder. No one gene is going to explain what happens in the brain. And this genetic work has really radically shifted our understanding and conceptualisation of epilepsy. because, you know, epilepsy has had all sorts of strange and wonderful stories about it over the millennia, really. So this is the genetic story that's unfolding now, which is of great interest. Sam was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society in 2007, and we are delighted to have him here to speak to you tonight. Before he comes up, there's pen and paper on your table. I draw your attention to it. We haven't had the opportunity to ask questions of our guest orator tonight, and that's what we're going to do after Sam's presentation. David Pennington is going to conduct a question and answer dialogue with Terry, and what we'd love is your input in that. So get the pens and pads out. Are there any questions that arose from tonight's oration, or generally from Terry's work? We'd love to have your input. Staff from NICTA will be circulating. Hold up your piece of paper. We'll pull them up to stage. David's going to work like a wizard and integrate them into the conversation. So, without further ado, please put your hands together for Sam Berkovic.
Thank you very much, Natasha. It's a great honour to be asked to speak, and really to thank Terry for his wonderful oration tonight. When Natasha introduced Terry downstairs a couple of hours ago and introduced the concept of neuroscience and the brain, she mentioned that the brain is her favourite organ. The once fashionable Woody Allen said, "The brain, well, that's my second favourite organ." And I suspect the views of the audience are roughly split down the middle. But we all regard it as important. So I'd like to congratulate Terry on a really wonderful talk. I've followed his science for very many years, although mathematics and computational biology is certainly not my strength, but it is something that impacts very, very heavily on the disease that I study of epilepsy, where the neural connections go wrong, and his contributions to understanding how the brain works and how it doesn't work in disease have really been very important. And I'm sure all of you, and perhaps particularly the science teachers and the students, will appreciate how he's been able to communicate incredibly complex concepts in a very simple way. And in fact, that's the mark of a great scientist. I remember when I was a younger scientist, I used to often go to research seminars and I would hear a talk and I'd go out of there and not really understand what the heck was going on. And I thought it was a problem with me. And then you start hearing Nobel laureates speak, and people who really know their stuff, and those people communicate crystal clearly. And that actually is one of the marks of a very good scientist. And I'm sure you'd agree with me that Terry did that in a beautiful way tonight. Another point I'd like to raise, and this is something that applies generally to science, that there's a tension in science between reductionism and trying to understand a complex system. So, for example, if as a scientist you wanted to figure out how a mousetrap worked, how a watch worked, or how a car worked, the typical way is you break it down into little bits and then you kind of put it together again. And that sort of works for some things. But for other things, it doesn't work so well. Things like the weather, things like the brain. And there is a major trend now in science, and particularly in neuroscience, for analysis of complex systems, and that's exactly what Terry is doing. However, to me, as a scientist, he showed beautifully how these two areas work together. He showed us with that wonderful example of a honeybee how the study of a single neuron can lead to an understanding about how the honeybee finds his pollen. And astonishingly, that's got parallels with reward systems in the human brain. he mentioned about dopamine, which is very much the system, the chemical system in the brain that deals with reward and perhaps even punishment. And indeed, as I was talking to Terry before, excessive dopamine leads to one of the great evils of our society that's actually just across the river, and that's gambling. And there's actually interesting studies to show that excess dopamine is related to this. So this was, to me, a beautiful example of how the reductionist approach can actually lead to fantastic insights into very complex systems, and what could be more complex than things like reward and punishment in neuroscience. And he went on to show us that wonderful example of Ruby, the social robot, and this lovely concept of neuromorphic engineering, of how perhaps there's real insights, how we'll understand those really very important things of how we are human and those social aspects that are so important. And then when they go wrong in devastating diseases like autism and schizophrenia and other neuropsychiatric illnesses. So on behalf of the audience, of the scientists, of the lay people here, I'd like to thank Terry for really a wonderful lecture. You've enriched us, and I'd encourage the audience to think about the talk, to get their pens and papers out and ask their questions for the forthcoming Q&A session. Thank you very much.
Another perfectly pitched presentation. Thank you. Let's thank Professor Sam Berkovic. And Sam, I think your field is so crucial. I know whenever we broadcast on epilepsy, the amount of interest and investment in the science from the wider community is so huge. I have no doubt that you're dealing with that every day as both a clinician and a researcher. A huge area of interest, and I guess consumers are very active and involved, aren't they, in the community of people interested in epilepsy. So thank you. Another bridge builder. Can I invite Professor Emeritus David Pennington and our orator for this evening, Terence Sajanowski. Sajnowski. Everyone's been pronouncing it differently, and that's the first time I've got it wrong, I'll have you know. Welcome to the stage. What we have now is a Q&A session. It's an opportunity that we didn't have at the end of the oration to ask Terry some questions, and David will kick us off. Can I, first though, as they settle into their chairs and get comfortable, can I acknowledge further sponsors of tonight's event, Professor Snow Barlow, who is Chair of the Victorian Endowment for Science, Knowledge and Innovation, Professor Emeritus David Pennington, of course, Chair of Bionic Vision Australia, thank you for your support, Associate Professor Andrew Peel of the Australian Synchrotron, Ms Michelle Gallagher, Chief Executive of the Bio-Melbourne Network, Professor Jeff Donnan, Director of the Florey Neuroscience Institutes, I should say. An incredible hub that's growing here in Melbourne, linking so many different institutions, isn't it? Very exciting to see. Can I also make a special mention of Professor Christopher Gray of Deakin University and Ms Rowena Coots from the University of Ballarat for their support in linking us up via live stream for the oration. I think that linking of Melbourne to regional areas and linking science back into regional areas in Australia is crucial. So well done for that, thank you. You've had the main course for your bellies, now it's the main course for your brains. It's a delight to have Professor David Pennington back on the stage. Of course, a super distinguished career as a medical educator, administrator and advisor on healthcare issues, for which he became a companion of the Order of Australia in 1998. Thank you for being here. And many other roles, including Vice-Chancellor of Melbourne University and now Chairman of Bionic Vision Australia. Wonderful to have you here. And to add to your bedside tables, I should note that last year saw the release of David's autobiography called Making Waves, Medicine, Public Health, Universities and Beyond. Congratulations on the book. So, notepads, staff are coming up with their questions. Let's welcome Terence Sanofsky back to the stage. It's wonderful to have you in Australia. Take it away.
Well, thank you, Natasha. Terry, if one looks for information about your career on Google, as one commonly does, one sees a bewildering array of issues that you've tackled over the years and in which you've made suggestions or contributions of greater understanding. One that struck me was your book in 2003, Courts and Sanofsky, Liars, Loves and Heroes, what the new brain science reveals about how we become who we are. And that's linked with comments that you've made about neuroscience gives new lights into even things like crime and abnormal behaviour of various kinds. Would you like to comment on that very broad agenda that you've tackled?
Well, that was a book that was aimed at a popular audience, a trade book. And the focus of the book was neuromodulators. What's a neuromodulator? Dopamine is a good example of a neuromodulator. It's not involved in the millisecond to millisecond computation, which is the way we think about computers. But dopamine changes the value of the computation. It changes how important something is for your life. It adds a new dimension. And in some people, it creates a lover. It creates someone who is able to open up their heart to other people, and perhaps even their wives. But in other people, it can turn them into maniacal predators, liars, sociopaths. How could that be? And it's the same basic mechanisms in the brain, modulating the processing, the value of why you're doing what you're doing. And there's another neuromodulator. I've already mentioned dopamine. I could have given another lecture on serotonin. So serotonin is another very, very important chemical in your brain. And if you go into prisons, you will find brains with the lowest serotonin on the planet. And the reason is that serotonin is important for how far into the future you're looking when you make a decision. So suppose that your serotonin is very low and you're trying to decide, well, should I steal this book that's sitting here? Well, it's a short-term reward, but you're going to get punished later, right? So you might do that and get punished. But what if your serotonin was high? If your serotonin is high, then you're more interested in, years into the future. So how do we manipulate this? Prozac, which is a very important antidepressant, raises serotonin levels, right? So here's a case where we can manipulate with a single intervention. A very important neuromodulatory system that affects your behavior on a moment-to-moment basis. That's what the book's all about. It's all about how, it's not just the content of what you're thinking, it's the value and what's important for your survival.
We've got a host of questions coming up and we won't be able to deal with most of them, unfortunately, in the limited time that we have, but I'll have one second one. There's a common saying that when you're dealing with difficult decisions and deciding what to do and having problems in resolving an issue, the best thing is to sleep on it. And that, I must say, is something that makes sense to me from my own personal experience. But you've studied dreams, you've studied sleep at great length,
and made major contributions of understanding of the different phases of sleep and what goes on with our various nuclei and so on during the sleep process. Would you like to comment further on that issue of getting rational sense coming back after a sleep?
Well, this is a wonderful suggestion, and let me look at my watch. It's now 3 a.m. in San Diego, so I may well be sleeping at this very moment. But you're absolutely right. We used to think that when you fall asleep, your brain turns off, and you do dream, but that's something you forget very quickly. So why do we sleep? It's a big mystery. We don't really fully understand. It replenishes our energy supplies, but you could do that without your brain turning off. Your brain doesn't actually turn off. It actually is still functioning. It's going into a very different state. It's clear that it disconnects from the world. It's no longer being driven by the outside. It's being driven by the inside. It's being driven by your previous experiences. Your brain is going over not just your previous experience, but how that fits into your whole past. All the previous experiences you've had, you've got to integrate the new experience into the old experiences. And the experience that we've all had, which is if you are thinking about a problem just before you go to sleep, if you're really focusing on something, very often when you wake up in the morning, suddenly it's much clearer. You come up with a new idea or a new insight, or you come up with a solution to the problem that you were thinking about. How could that be? Well, it must be that your brain was working on it overnight. Your brain was reorganizing the information in such a way that the problem is a lot more clear in your mind. And by the way, it's not just when you're sleeping. How many of you daydream? How many people here find their mind wandering right in the middle of the day? Well, that turns out to be very similar to the state of sleep, in a sense that you're disconnected from the immediate impulses from responding to the world, and you're reminiscing, maybe you're thinking about planning in the future. This is a part of the brain that was, until recently, unknown. It's called default arresting network. It's a whole brain circuit that no one knew about until they finally started looking at the resting state. There's a lot of work that's been done on brain imaging. You put somebody in a scanner, you give them a stimulus, and what do you subtract off to see the difference? You subtract off the resting state, right? You tell the subject, don't do anything, we're going to take a control, and you subtract it off. Well, Marcus Rakel, about 10 years ago, said, wait a second, let's look back at the resting state. And it turns out that it's a whole set of areas in the brain, the anterior cingulate and the prefrontal cortex, parietal cortex. These are areas that are activated when you're not responding to something in the environment. It's when you're just reminiscing, thinking, planning, and it has to be an important part of our function because of the fact that we spend a lot of time in that state. You have a lot of questions here.
I've got a massive question.
I'm going to have to shorten my response time.
Can the social robot feel emotions? Will this be a possibility?
Well, you're asking the wrong person. Emotions are something that were really basic to our ability to respond to other humans, right? I mean, that's kind of the coin of the realm when it comes to responding. But until recently, what we didn't appreciate is that a lot of our cognitive, our ability to make decisions was driven by those emotions. And especially decisions about difficult problems for which there's no logical solution. Issues having to do with balancing many different factors, and for which an accountant couldn't come up with a way of balancing apples and oranges. But it turns out that your dopamine system that I talked about is doing that every day. Every day you're making decisions about what you should do with your time, what you should do with your money. That dopamine system is ultimately your gut feeling about how you decide. So to the extent that we can create within social robots the equivalent of a dopamine system, I think that to that extent, yes, they will be able to have emotions.
You have written about the fact that you now have computers that can recognize emotion in the faces that they're exposed to.
Right.
They can distinguish an angry face from a pleasant face and so on. And that's getting into this area in terms of analysis.
Oh, yes. And so I should mention that my wife, Beatrice, who's out there somewhere. There she is, okay. So Beatrice was involved in a collaboration with Paul Ekman, who is the world's leading expert on facial expressions. And she taught a neural network how to take a face and be able to tell you whether it was a male or a female. Now, you may think that's simple, but it turns out that there is no single feature in the face that can give it away. It's a combination of features. And facial expressions turn out to be very similar. Whether you're happy or sad, it has to do with different muscles that are being activated, multiple muscles. And with Paul Ekman, we were able to create a database and train neural networks in order to be able to make this decision about whether you're happy or sad or surprised or angry or disgusted. And now, when we first did this, of course, it took many hours and days of computer processing time. But now, with computers becoming faster and faster, it's possible to do that for a fast computer. It's possible to do that in real time, which means that it should be possible to use that as a way of interacting with computers right now. I mean, there's nothing. It's a solved problem.
Another question here: how far away are we from being able to have objective diagnosis of diseases that affect the unmeasurable emotions, behavior, perception, cognition, and self-consciousness?
Seems to be a lot of interest in emotions out there, especially after a long day of talks and food. It turns out that there are many measures. We already mentioned the face. The face is a mirror of your soul, of what you're thinking. Where you look, you're not aware of it, but your eyes are moving 3 times a second. Where you look turns out to be a very fine measure, very fine in the sense of temporal and information about what you're interested in. And we all know what men look at when they see women walking by, right? But you'd be surprised what women look at. It turns out to be very predictive of your interest of the other sex, is where you look.
Well, we're getting close to needing to wind up, but there's a lot of interest from people in education, many of whom are here in the audience, and you've written a lot about the process of learning, and your robot was very much introducing some of those thoughts, and the timing of memory build-up and all of those things are things in which you've made real contributions. But the question here that relates to education is a quote from Aristotle 300 years BC. The object of education is to teach people to find pleasure in the right things. This seems to have interesting connotations given tonight's lecture and the discussion on honeybees, neurons, and dopamine-type chemicals. The question is, what have you learned about the interrelationship between learning, pleasure, and brain chemistry? That's a complex one.
So this is really central to why we're here. Why are we here? Why are you here? You're here, I presume, not just because of the wonderful dinner and the wonderful talks and your guests. We're here because we're part of a community, a social community. Humans get pleasure out of interacting with their fellow men and women. And this is really by far the most important lesson that we've learned in many areas of science. And I'm talking here not just about neuroscience, I'm talking about anthropology, psychology. We're social animals. We thrive on interactions. Science itself is a social enterprise. And I'm really impressed with Graeme Clark's ability to bring together humans from different tribes. You know, different areas of science are like tribes. In terms of their language, they have jargon. In terms of their backgrounds, affiliations. And the fact that he could bring them together to work for a common goal is a really rare talent. And I think that if we could teach our students the importance and the pleasures out of interacting with others as a member of a team, we would really be farther ahead.
And the excitement of working with wonderful people who are exploring ideas that we can understand gives a sense of great satisfaction that stirs very positive emotions and drive us on. And that's part of the excitement of a life in research. Well, we've got another 20 questions here, but we've already passed the deadline to wind things up so that you can appreciate.
We should give them another 5 minutes. What do you think? Yes, I think. There were so many good questions in that list. I looked through them. I think we need to give you more time. So, do I get your vote? Fantastic. Thank you.
All right. Well, we'll just continue on a little. I've jumbled all of these questions. When an artificial intelligence...
Oh, here's a question.
Can I ask one? Because I
Please.
think it linked a few different themes, actually. And one of the things, Terry, that you said tonight was that we need to build social robots that mimic natural human expressions more adequately for them to be effective. And for me, the question arose, and it linked with a few questions in there, I think, around ethics. Do we actually want our children to stare into the eyes of a social robot, a little child that's still only developing a sense of themselves, and not differentiate between themselves and the other being a machine? I'm sort of interested in those, do we want our robots to get too like us, or do we need to keep a little divide going?
So, well, that's a challenging question. And so I guess what you're really asking is whether robots might be a bad surrogate for helping children to develop. Well, all I can say is that the kids really seem to enjoy interacting with these robots. The robots are not here replacing humans. Rather, they're serving as assistants. They're helping us to extend. We can't. You see, here's what we know about education. By far, the best way to educate a child is one-on-one human contact. And that's what parents are there for, right? But parents don't know everything. That's why we have teachers. But the teachers can't have one-on-one. They have classrooms, and you have too many students to interact with. So how are we going to be able to individualize education? The social robot will have an advantage in that the social robot will be able to keep track of every single interaction that social robot ever has with every child. That means individual educational experience. I think this is going to be a wonderful way to enhance the educational experience. Teacher is still there. It's not like you're replacing a teacher. The teacher is still there. The teacher is basically amplified. The teacher is there to inspire the kids. Right now we're having the teacher do all these mechanical things. Social robots would be much better at that, at delivering, the interactions in terms of, the individual words and the individual spelling, whatever it is that they're teaching. But without the teacher, we won't have we won't have role models. We won't have a way for children to be able to become, inspired. So I think that we'll have more time for teachers to be inspiring.
And in your talk earlier this evening, you touched on the fact that with analysing the teaching and learning process with these sort of arrangements, you're able to identify the timing that's necessary to let children take things in and understand them and use them. And that's something that then contributes to the process of teaching, so that we learn about the options of better embedding memories and so on that can be of value in ordinary classroom teaching as well as...
Well, let me give you one example of that. One of my colleagues at the Salk Institute, Rusty Gage, discovered that new neurons are born in the hippocampus, the part of the brain that's very important for long-term memory. If you read the textbooks tell you you have all the neurons you're going to have when you're born, and that's it. It's all downhill from there. Not true. These neurons are being born in the part of the brain that's really important for long-term memory, but the cells do not survive unless you have new experiences. And this has been done in rats, in mice, but also in humans, it turns out. And in a collaboration, we did a study with Rusty showing that the strength of the new connections in the hippocampus is twice as great, not just in rats that have been experiencing a novel or enriched environment, but also simply having an exercise wheel in the cage is enough for these neurons to survive. So that's interesting. Exercise, right? What are we cutting out of our curriculum? In the US, in order to train for the test, we're dropping recess. We're dropping gym. And if we may be actually doing the brain a disservice by trying to cram too much facts into the brain, when we should be giving the brain some free time, right, to exercise. It's not just the healthy body, it's the healthy mind. It's what Beatrice has been teaching me ever since we were married, is that you can't have a healthy brain unless you have a healthy body. And this is something that's so important in terms of education that I can't emphasize it more, that you really the two have to go hand in hand.
There are 3 or 4 questions amongst these that I'll just raise maybe as our last one. People wanting to know whether, in fact, in your view, the new neuroscience is going to shed new light on conditions such as autism and even schizophrenia by understanding better what's going on in the brain with analysing them in the sort of way that you've been approaching.
I mean, those 2 diseases are some of the most difficult diseases for parents to treat, as autism is very early onset within the first few years. Schizophrenia is interestingly delayed until early adulthood. But what we're discovering is that there may be a common denominator early in development. If certain types of interneurons that are responsible for inhibitory interactions of the cortex, if somehow early in development, because of an infection or some other reason, if they go awry, then the cortex cannot mature properly. And the question is, can neuroscience help us understand these diseases, which as far as there really isn't any cure for them. We can treat them. They're drugs, but they're really just palliative. They're not in any sense, curing the disease. But just within the last few years, there's hope. There's hope because we have molecular genetics techniques now to go in and find out what went wrong, which neurons, which genes, and if we can intervene early enough, and perhaps even after the disease onset, if we could intervene, it may be possible someday to reverse the disease, to prevent it. And this would be an enormous benefit, so there's enormous impact, not just on the individuals, but on the society that has to support these individuals. So I think this is something that neuroscience really is on the cusp of being able to make a big impact.
Well, Terry, you've been very generous with your time in flying all the way out here to speak to us tonight and giving us such a marvellous Graeme Clark oration, challenging all of our minds to explore new territories and ways to think about things. And you've been very generous in answering this range of questions, testing you yet further before you've even finished your meal. But I think I'd just like to ask everybody to join with me in thanking very much Terry for his remarkable contribution to an exciting evening.
It was my pleasure.
And can I also thank Professor Emeritus David Pennington, one of our great superstars. And thank you, Terry Sanofsky, for being with us. Enjoy your hiking this week.
Well, thank you, Natasha. You've been a wonderful hostess with the mostest.
Thank you. Thank you again. You have dessert. I hope you're enjoying it. This is the end of the formalities of the evening. Bringing scientific leaders together with the public audience, as we've done tonight, before the dinner is a really precious thing in Australian public life, I think, to be able to do. So thank you for being part of the event and taking this opportunity to celebrate the life in science of Professor Graeme Clark. Before I do a few last final thank yous, I feel the need to do a bit of a survey because Sam Berkovic mentioned Woody Allen's great line, the brain is his second favourite organ, and it's become apparent there's a bit of a gender divide around that, according to Sam. So hands up, women who think the brain is their second favourite organ. Of the women who thinks their brain is their favourite organ. So what is your favourite organ? I'm curious to know, maybe the heart. The heart. For men, who would vote that the brain is their second favourite organ? How terribly diplomatic of you. What about your first favourite organ, the brain? What about the heart? The kidney? The spleen? Well done. Can I also tonight play thanks to the Graeme Clark Oration Organising Committee for pulling this marvellous event together. Professor Rob Evans, Director of NICTA's Victoria Research Laboratory, Professor Evan Mariels, Dean of the Melbourne School of Engineering at the University of Melbourne, and to Professor Gary Egan, who most recently is of the Florey Neuroscience Institutes and is now with Monash University. Can we also thank the staff of the Melbourne Convention and Exhibition Centre for their wonderful meal and service for us tonight. It's been a delight to host the event. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.